Good morning. It is Tuesday, January the 8th, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. Speaking to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. So I have a clip for you from Liz Wheeler, the OAN network, and it's a segment that's called The Final Point.
Welcome back. One final point before we go. For an entire month each year, Hollywood celebrities get together to publicly praise each other. They air their internal love fest on national television, and about 2 people tune in to watch. I didn't tune in to the Golden Globes last night. I used to, but I don't really watch movies. And if I want to listen to a bunch of vapid airheads spewing their ignorant political views through a microphone, I just turn on C-SPAN and watch Democrats in Congress. So the reason I'm talking about these Hollywood celebrities tonight is to show you how Democrats, the Democratic Party, copies Hollywood political tactics. This is what I mean. Last night at the Golden Globes, Christian Bale thanked Satan, the devil, for helping him portray Dick Cheney in the movie Vice. Watch.
Satan for giving me inspiration on how to play this role.
Yeah, you know who else thanked Satan? Saul Alinsky in Rules for Radicals. See, what the Democrats are doing is they're trying to paint Republicans as monsters, or you might say, as the literal devil, to scare you into never voting for a Republican again. Democrats never deal with facts. They just use emotion. In other words, the Democrats think that you are as stupid as Christian Bale. They think you're so stupid, they can manipulate your emotions and you'll vote the way they want you to vote, like a puppet. Conan O'Brien's assistant, Andy Richter, did this too on Twitter. He tweeted, "I've said it before and say it again. If I was a woman, I'd be angry all of the time. Seriously, pick a place on Earth, and odds are women are getting the blank end of the stick. Pick a time in human history, and women are getting the rawest of raw deals. Then try not caring. Try feeling like everything's fine because it's effing appalling. Appalling." Isn't that mansplaining? Is this white man trying to tell us women how to feel? Imagine if a Republican did this. Again, Richter's trying to gin up women to manipulate us into voting how he wants us to vote. Actually, as a woman, let me share my perspective quickly. Andy's right. Women have gotten the short end of the stick throughout history. That is why we are so lucky to live in a nation like the United States, where there's equal protection under the law, regardless of gender. We are so lucky to live in a nation where we can marry who we want, get a job, drive a car, start a business, run for office, worship the God we want, and define the life we want. The only people in our nation who are trying to control women are Democrats. Democrats refuse to celebrate low unemployment for women. Democrats degrade any woman who works in the Trump administration. Democrats tell pro-life women, we aren't real women unless we celebrate abortion. Democrats want to deprive women the right to defend ourselves with a firearm, and Democrats push abortion, which ends the life of 500,000 unborn women in America every year. If I'm going to be mad, I'm going to be mad at Democrats for trying to control me for their own political gain. But the point is, Hollywood is the master of manipulating emotion, and Democrats are embracing this tactic in politics. Take Snoop Dogg, for example, or Snoop Lion, or whatever he's calling himself these days. Snoop Dogg just called the president the N-word. Listen.
Get back on and y'all get your jobs back, and it's time to vote. Don't vote for that. Please don't.
Imagine if a black conservative called a Democratic president the N-word. They would be socially ostracized. Democrats can't argue with facts, so they resort to name-calling and race-baiting and disgusting racial slurs. This is what Democrats have learned from Hollywood. Manipulate emotion, and you don't have to deal with facts. The more Democrats embrace Hollywood celebrities as PR agents for the Democratic Party, the more we have to hold Democrats accountable for the insane politics of Hollywood. And that is my final point. You can reach me on Twitter at Liz_Wheeler. If you liked the show, please send me an email at oann.com/contact. In the meantime, catch us here tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern. And until then, have a good night.
Okay, so let me There we go. So I got that off of YouTube. But anyways, a couple of things. First of all, in the middle of her monologue, she was talking about how lucky she is. And as a matter of fact, I think she said we, referring, I guess, to all women in the United States. How lucky we are to be in the United States of America, where all kinds of great things happen, and how lucky we are because we get to vote and own property, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, luck has nothing to do with it. Okay, I'm not lucky. I live in the United States of America. So I'm not lucky. Anybody who lives in the United States of America is not lucky. You're not lucky because you're living here. I live here by choice. I don't have to live in the United States of America. I could live anywhere on the planet I want to live. I choose the United States of America. And because I've chosen it, I believe, and I think I could at least produce evidence, if not prove, that it's the best choice. Living in the United States is the best. So I deserve credit for that. That has nothing to do with luck. Why? And Liz knows that. Everybody knows that. You know it. Everybody who lives in the United States of America knows that they're here because they choose to be here, not because they're lucky. So why does Liz say lucky? I'm lucky to be here. Couple of things. First of all, reasons. Number one reason is because of the left. The left emphasizes luck. This is one of the little ways they get in your psyche, and they do it through interviews. They'll interview athletes and other successful people, and one of the questions inevitably in the interview is, do you feel lucky? Why are they asking this question? It's not just something that they pulled out of their ear. It is done with the purpose of emphasizing and trying to sell a malevolent universe premise. In other words, the idea that the universe is a dark and scary place. It's full of boogeymen. It's full of global warming threats. It's full of misogynists. It's full of homophobes. And that failure is to be expected. And that the only way, therefore, that one can get ahead, be successful, is one of three ways: get lucky, cheat, or a combination of the two. Now, Liz Wheeler isn't going to say, I cheated, but she is going to say, I'm lucky. The other part of it has to do with Christianity. She's a Christian. I believe she's a Catholic, and that has something, feeling, expressing, well, I feel lucky is a way of expressing gratitude, which is definitely part of Christianity, and expressing luck also that it's humble, is a way of expressing humility, but it is definitely left. And so we've all been influenced by the left. I don't know how many people that I hear, friends and relatives, oh, I feel so lucky about this, I feel so lucky about that. Luck's got nothing to do with it. If you are an athlete and you're a professional football player and you've just set a record, or you won this, let's look at what happened yesterday, where Clemson beat Alabama for the national championship. Luck had nothing to do with it, or I can't say nothing to do with it. Luck matters on the margins. The rest of it is all about skill, effort, practice, training, discipline. Okay, so remember that. Don't tell people, oh, I only got what I have because I'm lucky. It's not true. Okay, it's not conservative. We conservatives are interested in the truth. The other part of this is, well, I don't know. I can't remember right now what it is, what else she was talking about that sparked a thought here. So I'll let it go for right now. But I am going to read from the Ayn Rand's lexicon. We're going to have a little bit of that, and then I'm going to finish up I'm going to start what I was promised us to read yesterday, and that is the Rules for Radicals Defeated, and then I will go ahead perhaps and get into the 10 books that screwed up the world and its corollary, the 10 books that every conservative must read, when I come back. And thank you very much. And let's go to here, Rules for Radicals Defeated. And the section that we're on in this particular chapter is, because he was talking about ends and means last time, and this section is called Alinsky's Argument that the Ends Justify the Means. Alinsky begins his discussion of means and ends by saying, quote, that perennial question, quote, does the end justify the means, unquote, is meaningless as it stands. The real and only question regarding the ethics of means and ends is, and always has been, quote, does this particular end justify this particular means, unquote. He then proceeds to call anyone concerned about the morality of the means involved, quote, moralists or non-doers, unquote. He claims that virtually no one who is concerned with the morality of means has made a case rooted in reality. He claims that people who are doing don't have the luxury of waiting around to consider the morality of the means they employ. He compares anyone interested in the morality of means with those who allowed Hitler to come to power. Really surprised to hear the opposition compared to Hitler or complicit in his rise to power, now aren't you? Before stating his rules of the ethics of means and ends, he says of those concerned with the morality of means, quote, their fears of action drive them to refuge in an ethics so divorced from the politics of life that it can apply only to angels, not to men. The standards of judgment must be rooted in the whys and wherefores of life as it is lived, the world as it is, not our wished-for fantasy of the world as it should be, unquote. I find it interesting that Alinsky, while saying that the community organizer must begin with the world as it is, also opens his book by saying, quote, what follows is for those who want to change the world from what it is to what they believe it should be, unquote. While his overarching goal is to provide a handbook for those who want to make the world better, he decides that when it comes to the matter of morality and ethics of means, he will simply disregard any notion of improving the world. After all, if the object is to make the world better, wouldn't we want to endeavor to bring out the best in mankind concerning the ethics of means and ends? Does the noble ambition only apply as we see fit? I think the answer to that question is that noble ambition to Alinsky only applies as Alinsky sees fit. The only thing consistent about Alinsky is his inconsistencies. Before I discuss Alinsky's 11 rules of the ethics of means, let's back up Alinsky's chapter preceding this chapter on means and ends. In the chapter entitled, quote, the purpose, unquote, he presents a window into some of the conflicting philosophies to which he subscribes. As you will see by the end of this chapter, we may consider his views inconsistent, but he simply would have argued that inconsistency is the nature of man, and so to be otherwise would be impossible. He presents a kind of moral dualism blended with Marxism and moral relativism. It's a nice blend from his perspective because it allows him to pick and choose philosophies and morality to suit his fancy without being subject to the scrutiny a more intellectual treatise would require. He stresses moral dualism as a backdrop for his treatment of the ethics of means. He says, quote, everything about us must be seen as the indivisible partner of its converse, light and darkness, good and evil, life and death. From the moment we are born, we begin to die. Happiness and misery are inseparable, so energy conversely carries the opportunity of peace and plenty, and so with every component of this universe, all is paired in this enormous Noah's Ark of life, unquote. He goes on to say, quote, this view of nature recognizes that reality is dual. The principles of quantum mechanics and physics apply even more dramatically to the mechanics of mass movements. This is true not only in, quote, complementarity, unquote, but in the repudiation of the hitherto universal concept of causality, where one always produced the other. In quantum mechanics, causality was largely replaced by probability. An electron or atom did not have to do anything specific in response to a particular force. There was just a set of probabilities that it would react in this or that way. This is fundamental in the observations and propositions which follow. At no time in any discussion or analysis of mass movements, tactics, or any other phase of the problem can it be said that if this is done, then that will result. The most we can hope to achieve is an understanding of the probabilities consequent to certain actions. This grasp of the duality of all phenomenon is vital in our understanding of politics. It frees one from the myth that one approach is positive and another negative. There is no such thing in life. One man's positive is another man's negative. The description of any procedure as positive or negative is the mark of a political illiterate, unquote. I chose to quote this section at length because it speaks volumes of Alinsky's mindset. It truly does offer a window into his twisted world of morality and ethics. He claims that ethics are like quantum physics in that there is no absolute, no predictable outcome in any given situation. Instead, there is only a set of probabilities that exist, and in any given circumstances, with any corresponding given variables acting upon those circumstances, the best we can hope to predict is some set of possibilities and not a specific outcome. He bases all of this on his belief in moral relativism, which is defined as, quote, moral dualism is the belief of the great complement or conflict between the benevolent and the malignant. Like ditheism and bitheism, see below, moral dualism does not imply the absence of monist or monotheistic principles. Moral dualism simply implies that there are two moral opposites at work, independent of any interpretation of what might be, quote, moral, and, unlike ditheism, bitheism, independent of how those may be represented, unquote. Alinsky needs moral dualism. He cannot present his tactics otherwise. If he is to present his tactics as the methodology for bringing about a necessary revolution of the have-nots against the haves, then he must remove any necessity for any moral and ethical underpinnings. After all, he is presenting rules to help community organizers transform the world from what it is to what it should be. He knows that the tactics he promulgates cannot be supported by any consistent moral framework of ethics for this purpose, because he is offering tactics that he knows are immoral as a means to accomplish a task of moral necessity. He is indignant about the moral wrong of poverty and a class-type structure in America. His rules for radicals are a set of rules useful for bringing power to that underclass. He simply cannot present the need for a moral revolution concerning class while accomplishing it through morally inconsistent means without somehow explaining, or explaining away, why poverty is a moral imperative, while the means necessary to overcome that poverty must be morally objectionable. Alinsky is at least smart enough to know he is caught in any inconsistency. This is why he goes so far as to say that his argument for moral dualism is, quote, fundamental in the observations and propositions which follow, unquote. We can only explain such inconsistencies if it the nature of things to be consistent, if it is the nature of things to be inconsistent. To understand Alinsky and his tactics, we must understand that he embraces the inconsistencies. He does not shy away from them. To Alinsky, the fact that good and evil coexist in every human being is sufficient to explain such inconsistencies. Most of us would argue that while there is a duality to man, there are certain absolutes. While, at times, killing may be justified, murder is not, for example. Inherent in this dualistic view is the understanding that the revolution he is seeking is dualistic as well. He says, quote, once the nature of revolution is understood from the dualistic outlook, we lose our mono view of a revolution and see it coupled with its inevitable counter-revolution. Once we accept and learn to anticipate the inevitable counter-revolution, we may then alter the historical pattern of revolution and counter-revolution from the traditional slow advance of 2 steps forward and 1 step backward to minimizing the latter. Each element with its positive and converse sides is fused to the other related elements in an endless series of everything, so that the converse of revolution on one side is counter-revolution, and on the other side, reformation, and so on in an endless chain of connected converses, unquote. We will see more about Alinsky's use of the positive and the negative when we discuss the 13 tactics in the next chapter. But it's important to take note here that Alinsky sees the idea of constant battle, of back and forth, as central to his way of thinking. I repeat a certain quote over and over in this book, quote, the action is in the reaction, unquote. I do this because this continuous action and reaction is a central thesis of the Alinsky model. And if you fail to understand this, you will fail to understand Alinsky. If you fail to understand Alinsky, you will likely be defenseless against his tactics. Moreover, you will not be able to recognize them when they are used on the national stage. And really what all of this stuff that Alinsky is doing, this is typical activism. Activism is the theory that one should act first, think later. And that's exactly what it is that Alinsky is. What it basically means, act first, think later, is act impulsively. Oh, look, I see a poor person. I'm going to rush over there and help them. And along the way, I'm going to knock down all these rich people that are in the way. I'm going to burn their cars, and I'm going to, just create general havoc. And then when somebody stops you and says, what are you doing and why, you rationalize. The whole thing that all of this crap that Alinsky is coming up with in terms of his so-called theory really isn't theory at all. All it is rationalization. It's his way of saying it's okay for me to do whatever I feel like because dualism, monism, and etc. In this particular case, just dualism. Okay, because life is dualistic, because there are the consequences and the actions and reactions, and it's just a bunch of crap. It's the only difference between him and a child is that he is more articulate. Bottom line. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the I'm going to be reading from Ayn Rand's lexicon. Okay, thank you very much. And so yesterday I left it, the concept of the day was duty. And so we'd gotten about into the middle of her definition of duty. In reality and in the objectivist ethics, there's no such thing as duty. There's only choice and the full, clear recognition of a principle obscured by the notion of duty, the law of causality. In order to make the choices required to achieve his goals, a man needs the constant automatized awareness of the principle which the anti-concept duty has all but obliterated in his mind. The principle of causality, specifically of Aristotelian final causation, which in fact applies only to a conscious being, in essence, the process by which an end determines the means, i.e., the process of choosing a goal and taking the actions necessary to achieve it. In irrational ethics, it is causality, not duty, that serves as the guiding principle in considering, evaluating, and choosing one's actions, particularly those necessary to achieve a long-range goal. Following this principle, a man does not act without knowing the purpose of his action. In choosing a goal, he considers the means required to achieve it. He weighs the value of the goal against the difficulties of the means and against the full hierarchical context of all his other values and goals. He does not demand the impossible of himself, and he does not decide too easily which things are impossible. He never drops the context of the knowledge available to him and never evades reality, realizing fully that his goal will not be granted to him by any power other than his own action. And should he evade, it is not some Kantian authority that he would be cheating, but himself. A Kantian or even semi-Kantian cannot permit himself to value anything profoundly, since an inexplicable duty may demand the sacrifice of his values at any moment, wiping out any long-range plan or struggle he might have undertaken to achieve them. The notion of duty is intrinsically anti-causal. It is in its origin a duty defies the principle of efficient causation, since it is causeless or supernatural. In its effects, it defies the principle of final causation, since it must be performed regardless of consequences. The acceptance of full responsibility for one's own choices and actions and their consequences is such a demanding moral discipline that many men seek to escape it by surrendering to what they believe is the easy, automatic, unthinking safety of a morality of duty. They learn better, often when it is too late. The disciple of causation faces life without inexplicable chains, unchosen burdens, impossible demands, or supernatural threats. His metaphysical attitude and guiding moral principle can best be summed up by an old Spanish proverb, quote, God said, take what you want, and pay for it, unquote. But to know one's own desires and their meaning and their costs requires the highest human virtue, rationality. And I think it's kind of interesting and a little bit ironic, and romantics love irony, and she considered herself, Ayn Rand did, a romantic realist. But she was an atheist. And so for her to quote the Spanish proverb and quote in which they're quoting God, I think, again, is rather ironic. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading a little bit from the 10 books that screwed up the world and 5 that didn't help. Okay, thank you very much. And so in the 10 books that screwed up the world and 5 that didn't help, we're on Karl Marx's book, The Communist Manifesto. And so to the book. If we might indulge in Marx's passion for simplicity, we could put his entire argument in a slogan, quote, "You are what you produce," unquote. This includes the ideas you produce. That is, human ideas are one more product of human labor, and Marx believes that they are decided by a society's modes of production. In a fishing village, the language, laws, and customs, the notions of rights and privileges, the morality and mores will all be determined by its occupations: fishing, fish packing, shipping. The same is true for culture. The focus of these villagers' art will be the sea and its bounty. They will sing songs about fishing, tell stories about great catches, and their proverbs will be tied to lessons learned at sea. Above all, their notions of the divine will be taken from their way of life, so that just as Hebrew goatherds and warriors spoke of the great shepherd warrior in the sky, the fishing community will imagine a Neptunesque deity. That's about as far as I can go in making this aspect of Marx's argument plausible. Obviously, he espouses a radical relativism of morality, culture, and religion. But how is this radical relativism revolutionary? Why is history driving toward the grand conclusion of communism rather than being merely a chronicle of the endless successions of various cultures, each self-contained and defined by its peculiar mode of production and hence way of life? Now we are entering the core of Marxism. We accused Marx of being too abstract, of not attending to the real particularities of the evidence. We stand by that accusation, but add an explanation to avoid the obvious retort. Quote, "You haven't read much from Marx beyond the Communist Manifesto, or you would have run into his excruciatingly detailed historical economic analyses, such as in Das Kapital," unquote. To answer this reasonable charge, let's use an appropriate illustration to demonstrate both the revolutionary core and the central error of Marx's approach. Imagine if I were studying the family and focused in particular on families in which there were serious conflicts between parents and children. From this, I concluded that the dynamic governing all families as families was, quote, intergenerational conflict expressed in power relations of age-related dominance and rebellion, unquote. As it turns out, I also happened to live in a time in which the breakdown of the family was prominent, so that I was able to gather plenty of evidence for my conclusion that the dynamic governing families was intergenerational conflict. Then, fired by the success of my thesis, I turned to history and found that in whatever society I looked, there were families consisting, lo and behold, of parents and children, older and younger generations, and that there were signs of conflict, although not nearly as severe. From this, I gather that because intergenerational conflict has grown alarmingly over the generations, there must be an overall historical trend grinding to an inevitable historical conclusion: the final rebellion of all children, resulting in the abolition of the family. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it there for the time being, and when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the 10 books that every conservative must read. Thank you very much. Welcome back. Benjamin Wiker is the author of both of these books. So, and here we are in this particular book. He's talking about reading about Aristotle, and he had also gone on and explained Aristotle's ideas in terms of what constitutes good governing and bad governing. And right now we're at a section called How to Destroy a Republic. If the middle class is the strength of a republic is nevertheless easily destroyed, as Aristotle makes dolefully but prudently clear. The delicate balance between rich and poor can be toppled. Self-interest can trump the common good. The austerity of moral virtue can be traded for soft comfort and pleasure. Such revolutions come from small beginnings, from factions at odds with the political order. Here, too, is a great conservative point. No political regime, no political order is exempt from corruption. If the characters of the people fail, the regime will split at the seams and unravel. For Aristotle, the, quote, greatest factional split is perhaps that between virtue and depravity, unquote. Morality is the great cement that holds a regime together. But when war is waged on morality, when depravity comes to blows with virtue and gains the upper hand, when depravity comes to blows with virtue and gains the upper hand, then a good government can quickly become a bad one. On these grounds, so-called moral issues are the fundamental ones. Next comes the economic split, quote, between wealth and poverty, unquote, between rich and poor, oligarch and democrat. A regime can be torn apart from the side of the poor. A democratic revolution occurs, quote, particularly on the account of the wanton behavior of the popular leaders, quote, unquote, who, on behalf of the poor, harass, quote, those owning property, unquote, and, quote, egg on the multitude against them, unquote, and, quote, slander the wealthy in order to be in a position to confiscate their goods, unquote. Even more ominous, the demagogues, quote, in order to make themselves popular, unquote, so they can get elected, assert that the will of the people is supreme over the law, or in American political terms, that popular political projects can override the Constitution. Democrats certainly seem to have something of the truth in defining justice in terms of political freedom and equality, but Aristotle notes that they, quote, define freedom badly, for there are two things by which democracy is held to be defined, the majority having authority and freedom, unquote. But here things start to go badly. While justice is rightly held to, quote, be something equal, unquote, the majority come to believe that, quote, political equality requires that whatever the multitude resolves is authoritative, and freedom and equality involve doing whatever one wants, unquote. The result is that, quote, everyone lives as he wants and toward whatever end he happens to crave, unquote. Liberty, the right to be a free man, then becomes license, the right to be an immoral man, and justice is defined as having an equal right to do whatever we want. The desire, quote, to do whatever we want, unquote, and the premium on, quote, tolerating everyone living as he wants, unquote, leads to a situation not much different from tyranny, because the demagogues create something akin to tolerance police to enforce political correctness. Women are encouraged to inform on men, slaves are set against their masters, and the self-flattering majority against the independent-minded. Moreover, the Democrats, in order to enhance their power of numbers over the oligarchs, quote, add as many persons as possible, unquote, who were previously excluded as citizens, including people who were previously classified as resident aliens. If Aristotle is no friend of egalitarian democracy, he also maintains that, quote, the aggrandizements of the wealthy are more ruinous to the polity than those of the people, unquote. So he's no friend of oligarchy either. The rich can do a lot of damage precisely because they're rich, and they can buy a revolution in government. Just like the Democrats, they can rule tyrannically when they rule by their will rather than according to the law. This is especially a problem with elections of public officials, where moneyed interests more easily gain public offices. Oligarchies are unstable governments because the wealthy are inevitably divided into factions, with the factions appealing to the masses against each other, but with each faction just as self-interested as the last. Another kind of revolution occurs when the oligarchs expend their private wealth in wanton living. As with Democrats who exchanged liberty for license, dissipated oligarchs invited takeover by a tyrant or a rebellion of the frustrated and disgusted many who realize the oligarchs are not fit to share in rule. Sound familiar in any way? Reading Aristotle today, he can seem like a political prophet, a conservative who foresaw many of our current political problems. But it is important to remember that Aristotle's seemingly prophetic powers were the result of his being conservative in another all-important sense. He conserved the political lessons of history. Quote, looking backward, unquote, gave him the wisdom to, quote, look forward, unquote. Human beings are remarkably and lamentably all too predictable. And that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, I thank you for listening and have a great day.